Booking shows. Wow. I feel like this is a topic that I could go off on for a long time, and there are many facets to this as well. But I think the first thing I want to talk about is just booking shows personally. And obviously, being a musician and having done it for about 10 years now, I've done a fair bit of booking. And sometimes it goes pretty smoothly, and other times you don't hear back, or there's no pay involved, or just a variety of other circumstances. You can't get a hold, or you can't get in touch with the venue owners, at least not without a lot of tenacity. And I think that's important as a musician to have tenacity, for sure. There's no question. I guess early on, it's one of those things where you probably do want to go to a venue where you can hone your craft, and it's a safe place to do that. And even if everybody isn't enjoying what you're doing or your music, you can sort of chalk it up to experience. You can still put it in your portfolio. You could put together a little bit of like a press kit and say, I've performed at 120 shows, which is one of those things that I can personally put in my resume. And it's definitely not one of those things that I approach arrogantly and say, look how many shows I've performed. Look at how great I am. No, it's just one of those things, like, people want to know that you've got experience, you've put in the time, you've put in the effort, you've paid the price to be where you're at. And that strategy did work pretty well for me. It did book me some gigs, some pretty decently paying gigs over the summer. Not this summer, but in summers past. So, and obviously booking free shows early on, I think it's just inevitable. Like, unless you've spent, 3 to 5 years in your basement, 8 to 10 hours every day, just honing your craft, I think it just takes longer. It takes a lot of time. I don't feel like I even caught my stride as a vocalist until last year. And everyone would say, sing from the diaphragm, sing from the diaphragm. I couldn't figure it out. It took me that long to figure it out. I was probably, I think I was singing more or less from day one of playing guitar, because I just thought that would be like a vital element, even if I was just going to be a backing vocalist and not a lead vocalist, to also be capable of singing. And I was right. There are definitely advantages to being able to sing and bring more tools to the table, as it were. If you can play guitar, sing, do a few other things, even like sight reading or chart reading, if you can do all that, you're bringing a lot of the skill to the table for whatever band you play with, or even if you're playing solo. So free gigs is it's one of those things like, if you really don't want to play them, then do the time in the studio. Woodshed. Take some time to really, really hone that craft before you bring it to the public. And even then, I think it's almost necessary early on, for the sake of exposure. Yeah, I know, as artists we kind of hate that word, but I think it's kind of necessary, even as artists, to kind of just do it for some exposure, do it for some experience, and as we go along, we can increase our value. And then there's kind of the facet of booking shows for others. And this is one of those things that I've started doing more of. And I have to warn you, it's not for the faint of heart. And me being a very sensitive person throughout most of my life, and, gradually some of that has come off. I think, it could be related in some ways to pride. It could just be, something that runs in the family a little bit. But being sensitive is, it really is challenging. I think a lot of artists are sensitive. It's just the way we are natured. And that has its advantages in terms of songwriting, in terms of observing the world. And I think that's part of what an artist does, is they observe and interpret the world. But wow, booking shows for others, and not so much convincing as selling the idea of playing for free and playing for an audience that, is going to be very receptive and buying merchandise and anything you have to sell. I've still found it a challenge to explain to artists how that's all going to work and how that's going to benefit them. And the first question that tends to come up is, how much is it going to pay? And I think that's a fair question. I don't think I've really approached it that way myself. Usually I'm hoping that if it's a show that I book myself, that it's going to be paying. Or if it's a show where it's like in a bar and there's going to be several acts that night, I think there is some expectation that there's going to be pay. But I think it's determined by set length as well. If someone required me to play for 2 hours, I know there's a certain amount of energy exertion, and I would hope to see some decent pay. And I totally understand that. 30 to 45 minute set is kind of another matter. If it's an event where, again, there's an attentive audience, they're going to buy, they're going to be interested in what you're doing and want to support you, that might be a different thing entirely. And I mean, there's really always exceptions to the rule from a personal standpoint. I would make exceptions for charities. I would make exceptions for churches and church groups. I think there are opportunities that kind of have rewards within themselves. So maybe the question that artists need to be asking is not what it's paying so much as how is it benefiting, and how is it going to be of mutual benefit? Because there are many rewards besides just monetary. Even how does this benefit almost sounds bad in a different kind of way, but I feel like that's it's a good question to ask yourself is, what sort of, reputation does the venue or the company that's booking have? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it controversial? Because sometimes controversial doesn't mean bad. But what I've discovered in this process of booking other bands is there are jerks at every level. And I'm not pointing fingers to anyone specifically. I think if you know what you're doing and you know what you're going after, stick to your guns. Like, don't let me tell you what to do. You know your music, you know how to handle your career better than I could even tell you. I can only make suggestions. I don't think I could even necessarily be qualified to give advice, as much as that's kind of what I do with the podcast. It's really just more of a thought process for me. But, I'm still kind of puzzled as to how you make it in the music industry without being courteous. I've interviewed so many people who could have easily said no to me, but they were very humble and gracious and came on the podcast and talked, and probably for a good 30 minutes to an hour, no less. And I think that's one of those things, is it a matter of access, or is it a matter of humility? And maybe you don't want to do interviews, and maybe you don't want to play a show where, you don't see any pay or any monetary reward for doing it. It's a different thing. Do you want to make a living making music, or do you want to have additional pay on the side? And I know that most artists are working a day job, but that's still a really important question. How do you intend to make a living? And if you're depending on music to do it for you, is music really your passion, or has it now turned into a second career? And if it's turned into a second career, how tired are you? How, are you still managing to keep the passion for music, or are you losing it? It is a problem. I really do believe, and I understand that musicians not getting paid is a problem. But again, it's one of those things where it's important to look at it I think it's important to look at it as a event and case by case basis. Because I don't have anybody knocking on my door every day going, hey, we'd like to book you, and it's in a dive bar somewhere on the edge of town, and it pays $10 per musician, and we want you to play for 4 hours. I don't get offers like that. I don't know what everyone else is getting. I don't know what you've experienced. Maybe you've experienced far worse. I can't say, but I'm personally not getting people knocking on my door every day going, we like to have you, we like to feature you, we like to promote you, we like to treat you well. Quite the opposite, right? Like I've had shows where there was a lot of promises and yet nobody showed up, despite the promotion and other effort that went into it. So the reward was very small, and we almost didn't play. We've done other shows where we went to the effort to line it up, work things out with the bands, who were asking, of course, what would it pay, and we laid it out quite clearly that it would be door plus, a percentage of bar, and didn't bother to bring out a crowd. So really, you want to make money. If you know that it's door, then there's probably promotion that should go behind your efforts. If you don't promote, you don't get paid, right? I mean, that's just how door works. Do I think that music venues should only be offering door? No, I think there should be a percentage of bar, or I think there should be a guarantee rate, or I think there should be some kind of base rate that's going to go along with door, especially if the door is, $2 or $5 or something like that. On the other hand, if door is $10 or $15, if you promote it well, if you bring out, 50 to 100 people, it can be a very profitable night for the bands that are performing. So there's that aspect to booking as well. So, booking shows for yourself and others, and of course, booking shows for others. And I'm just getting started in booking shows for others, so, I think maybe it's only natural that there's some challenges going along with it. And I'm trying to be as courteous as possible. I'm trying to explain the event in a manner that makes sense. Sometimes it's not received well, and that's okay, but in some cases I think it's worth trying once and seeing for yourself if it's worthwhile or not, because how can you really judge an event if you've never played it? You could just go on hearsay, you could trust your gut, you could go on your opinion, whatever the case is. There's obviously events that aren't promoted or booked well or not clearly thought out. In fact, my friend Jonathan got booked for just such an event, and it was not, it was required of him to play for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of money, and it just wasn't sufficient. And I don't think, the truth of the matter is artists hate, again, we kind of talked about this, but exposure. The whole idea of, we're going to get, it's not a paid event, but guess what? You get some exposure. Sometimes that's true, though. As played as that card tends to be in music today, and as much as we hate that as artists, and I get it. I totally get it. Again, I've been performing for 10 years, so I wouldn't say I've seen it all, but I've definitely seen a lot of things. Sometimes that's valid. Sometimes the event is well promoted, and it is going to bring you to a new audience, and there are going to be people following you and buying your merchandise and liking you on Facebook, and there's a certain amount of sweat equity that can be built up from years of experience. That's how I built my mailing list. It's not huge, but I kept playing those tiny coffee houses and playing to the baristas and nobody else. I did it, and I grew my mailing list and sold CDs and gave away cards. Did it all pan out and turn into something massive and huge and snowball? No, not immediately, but eventually over time it paid off. And I personally, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but personally, I want to be the kind of artist that is humble no matter what. And, if demands are placed on my time, obviously, currently I would say I'm probably in one of the busiest times of my life, so I can't agree to do everything. But it's still one of those things where I think, having observed everything that can go on, and all the politics and jerkiness that can happen. I kind of want to be a nicer, a more approachable, kinder person to the people that ask me to play, and that's maybe something to look on from here on out. Should you adopt that for yourself? I guess that's up to you. Do you want to build your career up to a certain point and then just say I'll never do a free event again? I guess that's okay. I'm not gonna judge anybody. That's your choice. But again, there's a certain amount of paying price when you're still a developing artist, and I don't know if that's something that can be easily judged, but I have heard other artists talk about the fact that they spent the time really working on their craft, and they took their time to really be the best at what they could be. And then when they see other artists build on the same night that have barely so much as practiced enough to pull off a proper live show, it's disheartening because they get paid the same amount. And I think I understand that side to things as well. So really there's I think what I'm trying to get at ultimately is there isn't just one side to this. It isn't just the artist in the venue. It isn't just the promoter and the manager versus the artist. It isn't just various companies and events and other things versus the artist, or the world versus the artist even. I think it's important to see it from the other person's perspective. That way we can treat them as we would want to be treated. And that is ultimately going to be a more beneficial relationship and friendship. There are always perks to treating people well, I think. And I'm not suggesting that you treat people well because there's perks, but rather just treat people well anyway. Because if you want to be treated well as an artist, how long can you be a jerk and get away with it? I don't know. Again, I'm not pointing fingers, and this is for you to decide as an artist, or even if there's any venue owners or concert promoters listening. That's for you to decide. And again, it's not an easy gig. I'm finding it challenging. I'm sure I'm going to grow past this, and maybe take a percentage of it personally, but not too personally, so much so that it turns into offense and it just becomes pent up feelings. So that's my thought on booking shows.